think honestly, probably a mixture of both. I think that I found myself being very idealistic, whether it was working on a policy, and I can use an example of restoring the Clean Water Act. Clean Water Act, it's our historic legislation that regulates pollution in water. We've been working for about 7 years to pass a bill that would restore the Clean Water Act, close some loopholes. I was like, this is the year it's going to happen. We had some members of Congress telling us, yeah, we're committed to this. We're going to make it happen. I'd report back and be like, it's going to happen. And my boss was like, okay, it's great that you think that, but you should be a little realistic. Even, the Dems had control of both chambers at that point. I was gung-ho about it. And we got the bill further than it had ever been before. But it never got voted on the House floor, and it never went anywhere. And that's where I think my idealism has now come back to probably a more realistic level. And then, I think overall, though, people are, pretty idealistic that good things will happen. I think the cynicism comes in the reality that it's not going to be what you want, and you're going to compromise. And no matter how right you think you are, most likely the ideal perfect thing will never happen in Congress. You will not get what you want. But then again, we've seen better things happen in the last 2 years than we've seen in a long time. So, and from that perspective, environmentally we had some huge victories. Societal wise, we had healthcare, we had don't ask, don't tell. We had some big victories in that front too.
Scott, you may have a slightly different view of that progress, but regardless of that, can you respond to that question about sort of cynicism versus idealism, and what surprises you might have had as you started to work in this area?
So this is a little bit tricking the question, but the thing that surprised me most, I guess I did go into it with a little bit more of a cynical perspective, and the thing that surprised me most is that I think in most policy, or in many of the policy areas, I guess, that I've worked on, if you take the people who are thinking really hard about it from the conservative perspective, and take the people who are thinking really hard at it from the liberal perspective, and you put them in a room, you'll find they probably agree on 95% of the issues at play, and they probably agree that the way that it works right now is, about the worst way that possible. And so that for me was very heartening. So as I said, I spent 2 years doing tax policy research, and I actually gained a real strong affinity for tax. Although many people think that tax is horribly boring, I think it's very, very interesting. And I guess I never had much hope that we were going to have any type of real tax reform sort of in the last Congress, and we didn't. But at the same time, you become sort of a part of what I think is a slow movement in the right direction. Sort of as ideas get kicked around and as consensuses grow on certain things, I do think you see sort of policy moving slowly, tectonically. And I guess the second thing is that, so I worked in a place which had a somewhat different ideological bent than I did. I'm economically conservative, but socially not as much, and I was in a place which was sort of a very conservative organization. And I'll be honest, my views on things changed a lot by being exposed to different points of view. And a lot of the cynicism that I may have held before of certain policy positions or perspectives that I didn't understand, when I came to understand them, things are always more complicated than they appear.
Alissa, do you want to comment on the cynicism versus idealism topic?
It's a really great question. I worked on a lot of issues that were kind of like losing battles. Afghanistan and like trying to restore the development, versus military aid balancing, Iran, and trying to make sure that we weren't signaling, through passage of bills that, regime change was it, and that there could be a way forward. that supported, you know, the people of Iran and human rights issues without saying horrible things about the entire country. Working on, you know, passage of the Lord's Resistance Army bill that helped to, like, just do 100% cleanup and not so much work on military promotion of military ways of addressing a problem that, you know, for 20 years hadn't been addressed correctly militarily. So it was like, well, maybe we should try development this time. So I worked on a lot of things that lost. And so it's interesting, though, there wasn't, I mean, I guess part of the groups that I was working with, we were cynical, but a lot of it was just like, you know, when you get, a lot of people call it into the weeds, like really down looking at the specifics of things, there are smaller kind of issues that you're working on within a big umbrella issue. And if you get like a win, sometimes we call it a win, on a smaller issue, even if the larger issue seems like it's still not, you know, turning around completely, it gives you hope for the future. Like working on the military budget, the F-22 didn't get like new funding at a certain point, and for the people that I was working with, that was a win. Like, no, we're not going to turn around the military budget as a whole, but you know, the fact that there was recognition that there was an outdated machine that we were spending money on that wasn't helping anybody was something that kind of made us feel like, okay, at least something is working. Maybe there's hope for the future. And I think that when you do, especially like advocacy work, there's kind of a temperament that, like, you know, you have to be okay with not changing things really slowly. I liked what Scott said about the slow movement in the right direction. I think that's a lot of what you have to focus on. Like, are we moving in the right direction? Maybe moving at a glacial pace, but, you know, are we going to get there perhaps eventually? And sometimes it's about, like, maybe we didn't change something with the government, but we have helped educate people about, you know, the